Hello and welcome back. This is Seth Juarez. We're at Build 2016, and this would not be a good conference unless we talked about .NET languages. So I have every .NET language here represented except for one, and it's not that we did not try. So why don't you introduce yourselves, and then what language sort of you work with, and then we'll get started with the language that's not here, because I got reamed last year at Build for not talking about it, and it is important. Okay, so we'll start here and go.
Cool. So I'm David Stevens. I'm the program manager for Visual F#.
Okay.
I am Mads Torgersen, and I'm the program manager for the C# language.
And I'm Dustin Campbell, and I'm an engineer on all things C# IDE and Visual Basic IDE.
Very good. So let's start. I wanted Anthony Green to come.
Yeah.
Genius level, wonderful guy. It's social. I mean, it would have been great, but they didn't send him.
Yeah.
He's in charge of VB. So why don't we talk about VB, because I don't want people to think that when we say .NET languages, there's these languages, and then there's also VB. So let's talk about VB. There obviously is a future. Who wants to get started with that?
Well, I can do that.
Sure.
So VB is one of our biggest languages, right?
Sure.
And we have some of the most dedicated customers that we have are on VB. One of the things that we've been realizing is that for a while, we've sort of hitched VB to C# in a sense where we said we would do all our feature development in C#, and then VB would just get all the same things. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that we're realizing is that that's not always, it's not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing here, and not everything that's good for C# is good for VB. And so we are kind of starting to think about Visual Basic a little more on its own terms again, to kind of differentiate a little more, think about different features, and not necessarily say just because something looks cool in C#, we have to find a way to kind of squeeze it into Visual Basic.
Right, and also vice versa, right? Making sure
Yes.
that if there's a feature that's in the character of VB, we should do that, right? And not necessarily try and pigeonhole that or shoehorn that into C#.
It's kind of interesting that so one of the things that matters probably even more to VB developers and C# developers on average is the quality of the tools. Like if you think about the excellence of the Visual Studio tooling experience, it really all comes from the VB paradigm. It's something that C# users have been like, wow, things can be this good if they come from like a Java world or whatever. Yeah. That whole that whole paradigm kind of comes from VB, and I think that's crucial and central. And we want to make sure that the sort of the unified experience of tool and language and everything, which is so, I think, appreciated to VB developers, that's sort of in our mindset as the thing we focus on. It has to continue to be a Cadillac experience, all the way through the tools and language, and kind of an integrated experience.
Got it. And I have spoken with Anthony, and we are going to do some more videos on VB and what he's working on. It's some pretty cool stuff, and so we're not leaving that out. But the other redheaded stepchild at times.
He's more of a strawberry blonde.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, well, you're right. Strawberry blonde, step-headed.
What?
Yeah.
Something.
Something.
We're just going to leave that one
Yeah,
back
we're going
there.
to let that lay down. Okay.
It's been a long week.
Yeah. So F#. Why don't you talk about F#? F# has a fantastic community.
Yeah.
So let's talk about the difference between Visual F# and F#, because there is a difference. Yeah.
Sure. So just like C++ is an open standard, there's lots of language. People who implement C++ compilers or whatever, there's a distinction between the notion of the C++ language itself and then one of the implementations like Visual C++. F# is an open source language. There's a standard and a spec, and there's an F# Software Foundation that does a lot of awesome work. And they are separate from Microsoft, and so Microsoft, though, contributes engineering effort, so the Visual F# product from Microsoft is Microsoft's F#
implementation
product. Yeah, exactly. And absolutely, the community is essential to F#, and it makes it so much fun to be an F# developer. So as an example, like the language design process for F# happens entirely in the open in the community. So there's a fslang.uservoice.com where people submit ideas for new F# language features, and then Don Syme, who's the original author of F# and is still sort of the head of the community, He goes through and comments, and people discuss on the user voice. And then ones that have momentum behind them, there's now a GitHub, which is the F# language design GitHub, and people write up more formal proposals and can discuss it there. And then people from the community submit pull requests on GitHub to add those features to the compiler. And so F# language evolution and then library evolution happens at this sort of this different pace. And so even in the last couple of weeks, we've had new things get added to the standard library and all these things. So the community is involved all the way from making the language to spreading the love of F# all over the world, and so it's a ton of fun.
That's awesome, right? Because I feel like every language in the .NET families has sort of borrowed from each other certain aspects, right? And you see that C# has borrowed maybe from VB, or VB has borrowed from C#. What is the thing that C# is doing now that's very inspired by the F# community?
What aren't we doing?
Yeah.
Yes, what aren't we doing?
What are you talking about? We're just as good.
The Twitterverse is thick with jokes about this. Like, when is C# just going to drop the curly braces and fully become F#? So to be honest, the time has come for functional features to kind of really shine. Right? The history is on functional programming side, in that the sort of distributed systems world that we live in today, the way that you pass data around and kind of the way you operate on it, the concurrency that's involved kind of really fits with the immutable paradigms and so on from functional programming. And so we are importing into the sort of traditionally object-oriented language that is C#, we're importing more and more of those features. Making people accuse us of looking more and more like F#, not completely without reason. I think that's a big source of inspiration for us. We're very lucky to have an actual functional language next door, and I mean next door, like a few offices down from mine, so that we can sort of learn the details and the thinking and get all that right.
And even just the borrowing from the language, C# has now moved to sort of this open development way of doing things as well, and that's what I was referring to. Tell us about that sort of open development that you have with C#.
Do you want to?
Well, there's a couple aspects of that, right? There's the open language design. Which you could probably speak to, but also, being that all of the features we showed this week, and we showed a bunch, and I was talking to you about my laptop being steaming with
with bits that are
from all over, flying from all sorts of different branches.
This shouldn't work, but it's going to.
It's going to, exactly. But I didn't really pull anything in that wasn't actually already out in the wild on our GitHub repo. So I was pulling together things from various different branches, but all of it was public, right? So it's kind of interesting. If you just watch the repo, you know what we're doing. Yeah. And because we're developing in the open, we check in, in the same way that anybody that wanted to contribute to the open source project. So our project obviously is Roslyn, right? But we do that just like everybody else does, and that's changed how we think about development, because it used to be that we kind of go into this ivory tower, kind of think really hard and type really fast, and then here's a language. Tell us, here's a new version of the language. What do you think? And that has changed to a conversation, and more incremental development. So all the prototypes are up there. It's of the new language features we're trying out, and are there for people to give feedback to, or for people to contribute to, and we get to quite a bit about that as well.
And it's cool, right? Because you and I, we did a video, I don't know how many months ago, about stuff that you might not even see in production for a long time. Yeah. It's just like, hey, let's spitball some ideas, together, and that's really cool that the F# community does that, the C# community does that, and I'm sure the VB community will have that kind of involvement as well. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, so some questions are coming in. If you have questions, please, we want to hear them. Those are the most important. This is a have you heard question. Okay. Have you heard of the language called Nemurli, which has list-style macros with full VS 2015 support?
Yes.
Yes, the answer is yes. We've heard.
Yes, we've heard.
Awesome. This is great television, by the way.
Next one. No, I can. So, okay, let me. Nemurli does things inside of the language that are, he mentions macros that are sort of very meta-programmy. And maybe he's asking, are you thinking about doing some of that in C# or in our languages? And the answer is sort of both yes and no, because I think with the Roslyn infrastructure that we have, we are actually getting pretty good at doing meta programming like things from not from the language, but still at a programmatic level.
I get it.
And one of the things that Dustin showed yesterday as a very experimental feature, the source generators that he showed towards the end of the. Now you have to go watch the whole talk,
right.
the recording of it, right? I'm setting it up here. Is an interesting thing in that direction, without actually being much of a change to the language itself.
Right.
And what's cool is I spoke with Mr. Parsons, who's in the compiler group, and he
Jared Parsons.
Yeah, you don't want me to call him Mr.
No.
Is he? No, he doesn't.
No, we're
deserve-
just clarifying for the audience.
Oh, but Jared Parsons, and he was telling me just the stuff that the test you do with Roslyn, when you compile and you do it, there's full code fidelity, like backwards and forwards, and it's ridiculous. And so the amount of meta programming you can do with just sort of the Roslyn stuff is really interesting. Have people been doing crazy stuff with Roslyn?
Oh, yes.
He's like, yeah, we
they're
didn't have a
amazing.
unit test for that
Yeah,
kind of
they're-
stuff.
I mean, and crazy stuff at all levels, right?
Yeah.
Where people are trying different language features and coming up with ideas or doing amazing things with the APIs in the IDE. There have been a number of kind of what I would consider next generation experiences that like come alive, and some of those projects out there that have done just kind of taken things to a whole other level of what is achievable. People have been really surprising us, kind of at all levels of Roslyn though, IDE, compiler, language. It's really been amazing.
And there's like I have Gitter on my phone, right? And I see lit up every day 60 to 100 new things on the Roslyn group. I mean, it's pretty prolific, the amount of people that are sort of embracing Roslyn.
Yeah.
And Roslyn came out, it's been talked about for a while, it's been out for a little while. It's getting a little battle hardened, I think.
Technically, it RTM'd last July, but we've talked to you about it for like 5 years or something. Right? It's been
that's
going
true.
on and on.
Yeah, it feels like a long time.
Yeah, it does feel like.
All right, next question. Since C# got async away, it seems to have spread across almost every mainstream language. How do you feel about the impact you've had on the overall language landscape?
Oh, terrible. No,
Oh,
actually,
it's like, oh,
I can't
gosh,
believe they took those features.
no, you know,
They weren't
that
sound.
burned it to the ground. This is good for the ego, to be sure.
Yeah.
I think kudos are in order that actually F# had language.
I knew it. I was like,
Had
wait a minute.
language level
It was
support.
there first.
It had language level support for async in a somewhat different way.
Right.
It's funny with the async feature, the way it ended up in C#. It's not how we thought it was going to end up, and actually, I think part of why it's picking up in so many places. Again, it's something whose time has come, but it's also it just the right way to do it somehow. But so you'd think that we would just like have thought it up in 5 minutes, but it was actually years of some of the smartest people at Microsoft getting together. You know, I held meetings with the pull-in people from many, many teams, and we were sitting there for hours and poring over, and it was so non-obvious that it's hard to believe in hindsight how hard it can be to come up with the obvious thing. But it was really one of those that took years to give birth to, and then when it's there, it's just like, of course.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. There were many
Clearly.
different proposals too that you guys were
Yeah.
going through, all
Yeah.
sorts of different ideas for how to do this, and yeah, when you finally hit on the right one, you're
Yeah.
just like, right, that feels right. Yes.
But I think we didn't realize how it felt like a very C# specific thing or .NET specific thing. It was sort of very intertwined with a lot of the environment, the task type, and so on. So I don't think we realized how transferable it was to other languages. And it's really interesting to see now JavaScript, maybe C++, you know, some of those really big languages also being able to fit that same idea in.
Yeah.
That's great.
And under the covers, I don't think it's quite what everyone thinks it is. I mean, there's a literal state machine that you're maintaining to make sure everything's in the right place, that when you get back, things are doing the right thing. I mean, it's not a trivial thing.
No, it's a classic example of there's something here that's inherently complicated. How about we let the compiler do the complicated part of it, and just sort of there's when you're doing async programming, there's sort of accidental complexity and there's inherent complexity, right? And let's take all the accidental complexity out of people's hair and let them worry about what's actually the hard thing that a human needs to think about, which is how do I make sure that the wrong things don't happen while I'm, you know, on my UI thread or whatever, but without having to manage all the callbacks and sort of doing all the shuffling under the.
Just the notion of having an exception thrown, like where are you? Like if you're debugging something, like okay, where do I want to set the breakpoint? I mean, you see what I'm saying? Is you could be in any state at any given time. How do you manage that? And it turns out that was a tough thing to fix too, right?
Right, and of course, you know, the state machine, it was, you know, it can get very, very complicated, as we've been saying. And it was, in some ways, when we first put it out, it was too complicated for us, right? We got smarter as the years went on, and we realized, oh yeah, you mentioned throwing exceptions. I mean, we wouldn't have let you await in catch blocks before, right? Before the last release of the language, before C#6, because previous selves weren't smart enough to figure out how to do it, and then future selves were like, oh no, this is how we'll do it. And so now you can await finally in catch blocks in C#6, but we couldn't do that in the first one. It's because it is
We
inherently
got
complex.
smarter, or maybe you got smarter, and I was like, wow, I still don't get it.
We rethought it, right?
Can I tell you, with async await, I literally had to sit with this gentleman and John Skeet. We were at some aquarium. I'm like, okay, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to ask you tons of dumb questions about async await.
Yeah,
and then I found out there was a video series put out by, we just talked about him.
Lucian?
Lucian Wittig. He put out a 5-parter. It is the most brilliant 5 minute short, beautiful async await. It's just, and he's such a genius guy. All right, next one. When will we see the ability to add F# files inside of C# projects?
I don't think we will. We don't allow C# and VB inside the same project either. It seems like, for better or worse, we are very dependent on the project boundary also being the language boundary.
Yeah.
So I just don't think it would be very hard. Like, you kind of have to. You think about all the code in a project is sort of source code together, right? And so you have to think about a compiler figuring out the relationships between parts in the different
Multiple compilers.
Yeah, multiple compilers. So even though it sounds cool and you can sort of imagine the great user experience of that, for any of those 3 languages, I just don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. That's more complicated than async.
We would need some very different infrastructure, very different architecture. Something like, I can write, for example, Swift code and drop C code in there, because at the end it all goes through Clang, right? We would need something a little bit more akin to that, or we would have to totally put a hack in that was like, no, we're actually a virtual project and we're actually compiling multiple binaries and IL merging them together or something like that, and that just feels so dissatisfying.
Yeah.
Hacky's a good word. Yeah.
There's I don't know, as programmers, that sometimes when we solve a problem, like we feel like we need to take a shower right afterwards.
Right, yeah.
And then there's other times where, like, man, the elegance of this, and you try to tell someone that doesn't care, they're like, oh yeah, and you're like, come on, man. This is beautiful.
This is beautiful. Here, let's crack open a bottle of wine.
Well,
this is just wonderful.
Beautiful, right? And so you don't want to have to take a shower after you do stuff in a language that everybody might potentially get screwed up on.
No, but to be clear, I think it's a great idea. It's a great scenario. I would love to be able to do it. The mixing source code.
So
thing.
one day your future selves might come back and be like,
that was way easier than we thought it was.
Those were the
Gosh.
days.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, next question. I love all the new features that keep getting added to C#, but how much is enough? How many more features can keep getting added? And we had
really
this
good question,
conversation
yeah.
the other night just by ourselves.
Yeah.
When do we say it's baked?
It's a great question. I actually have a number of features that I keep secret, and so I have a counter. I count down how many I have left every time we add a new feature.
It's like next to his retirement counter too. It's like the same counter actually.
It's like, I need to add another feature now. No, it's really hard to say. It's one of those questions that I think we'll know when we're there. It also may be that we're baked for a while, and then the landscape changes and something new is called for, and then we kind of have to reopen the language and add some more stuff. I think if you go back to, I know for a fact that in interviews like this, maybe 8 years ago, when Anders was asked that kind of question, he would tend to say that I believe it has a few good versions in it, and then we're good. Like, you can't predict that far out in the future what would possibly be big and important enough that we would add it at that time. But it's just it's one of those journeys you can just see around one corner, and then you kind of just have to make it up from there. There is a special thing with languages is that you can, well, unless you're Swift, you can never take things out. Or at least we've set ourselves up so that we don't want to break people. Sorry, guys, come on.
Sorry.
We're live.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry.
This is
We're live.
embarrassing,
Sorry.
guys.
This is embarrassing. Sorry. Go.
You can never take stuff out of your language because there's all that source code out there that will break. So unless you're in a highly controlled environment, that just doesn't fly. So every time we add something, it gets bigger, gets more complicated. It kind of reveals things that aren't quite up to date anymore, and maybe 2 or 3 ways of doing things. So it gets a little more, crusty or every time, a little less elegant. And we kind of always have to balance that and remember that that's a budget, a really tight budget for slapping things onto it.
And would you say that sort of the language features are a reaction to sort of where technology is going as well?
That's often the case. Some of them, like async, totally is.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's just a reaction to, wow, this wasn't very needed, or it was more of a niche thing 10 years ago. Now asynchrony is everywhere. We got to handle it.
Yeah.
Whereas C# 6 it's mostly a grab bag of little features that would have been great 10 years ago as well.
All right, so next question. Any update on the efforts to reduce mem copies and allocations in C#?
Yeah, so there are a couple of features that we think would be sort of generally applicable that would help reduce memory churn, if you will, in C#. It's one of those areas that it's a little low level for C#. It's kind of on the low level end. And so whenever we do features there, they tend to not appeal to everyone. Okay? We are doing one thing in C#, which is allowing ref returns and ref locals. And so I showed that in the talk yesterday. And that's one of those features that will let you program things in a more efficient way. It'll let you think about a game developer. You will have you want to allocate things from the start. So you'll have a big struct array maybe to keep, you have all your asteroids and your spaceships and whatever pre-allocated. But now it's really hard to pass them around. Right? And so now we have a feature where you can just pass refs around to those structs, and that makes it a little easier to program with. But it's a little bit of a niche thing. You kind of have to need it. We've also talked about allowing slices, array slices. That's something that would need runtime work, and so it's a little more of a long lead thing.
Well, we have to clean up after ourselves. That's all I'm asking about. I mean, we're going full pointers. I mean, no, but the reason why I like managed language is because I don't have to clean up after myself, okay?
Yeah, no, I know, but what if you didn't make as much of a mess to begin with? That's essentially, I think it's that kind of thing.
Yeah. Wow.
You don't have to clean up, but somebody does, and they're doing it on your processor, right? So yeah, if you can reduce the clutter to begin with, that's a good thing.
That's a good point. I like that. Next question. C# 6 at first had primary constructors just like in F#, and they have been removed. I wonder what was the reason for the removal and if they will ever come back. I don't think I've ever heard of primary constructors. What are those?
It's essentially the idea that you can write a class declaration a little more like a function that takes parameters, and then they're really constructor parameters. But those parameters are in scope for the whole class, and so it's an easy way to, it's a short way to write a class if it has a constructor that's the most important one. We had that actually almost up to the end of C# 6. We kept changing it because we couldn't get it quite right, and that was part of the reason why we said, okay, we don't trust this feature to be quite right. Another one is that people actually wanted us to go further, and so we didn't want to sit on that syntax for something that was only getting you half the way there. So this time around, we're looking at a feature we call records, which is essentially primary constructors on steroids, where you essentially declare a class as taking parameters and then stop right there. That's all you say. You take these 5 parameters, and then they both declare constructor parameters. They declare properties that are public and immutable, and we declare equality, and we let it be, we let it have copying, kind of with like copying semantics and all kinds of things that you sort of reverse all the defaults of C# and create something that's a very F#-like object.
Yep.
He's just sitting there like giggling at all of us like good guys. And
in a very terse way, because sometimes you just need a very sort of idiomatic data-carrying object type. And so that's actually sort of the next step of primary constructors, if you will, the next go-around of us trying to get that into the language.
would you say a lot of the features that we've seen over the last couple of years have sort of added to the terseness and tightness of a language? Are those the kind of features that we're going to see moving on? Or are we going to see stuff that revolutionizes stuff, again, like with async and await?
Well, we would love to revolutionize stuff, but that's certainly an ambition, but there has to be a revolution. There has to be a need for a revolution, right?
And we also have to have a good idea around that too, right? And sometimes there are things we see that are that are important, and they are those revolutionary things, but we just don't have the perfect feature, where we got async to the place where it felt like, this is it, this is right, and we don't have that yet. There's a couple of things that we're looking at.
All right, we got rapid fire. We got about 4 minutes. Is there ever going to be a way to view and edit .NET code in the viewer's language of choice, i.e. VB as C#? Oh, that's weird.
Maybe. I think we're a lot closer. Someone could build that with Roslyn.
Is this effectively debugging a VB application in C#? I don't understand. Maybe you can help us.
It's more kind of having live translation, I think, is what we're talking about. So you know, it's a VB file. I open it up. It actually looks like a C# file, and when I make the changes, it kind of just goes right back to VB. It's something that we could do. It's actually trickier than you think because the languages are more different than you think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Especially semantically, they can be very, very, very different.
It's sort of It's sort of this paradigm of language syntax being a skin over an essential structure that they could all share. You're just sort of rendering it in a certain way.
Yeah.
And I think the languages are. Maybe they have to be designed for that a little more because they're different in so many accidental ways that it doesn't fully work. But you
can get like a 95%.
Any advice for newbie language designers?
I don't know. Wow.
Get
Advice
out.
for newbie language designers.
It's hard.
Oh yes, advice. If you can, get involved with somebody who's already doing it, and try to learn from the best, and just play, do it. But get involved in it. There's so many open source projects out there, that community-driven language projects that are really, really cool. Just join one of those, and check your ego and join somebody else's good ideas and see how they work with them, and kind of learn the process, because it's not enough to be brilliant and to have good ideas. There's a whole bunch of different skills and ways of thinking that you need.
There's also looking at another piece of advice would be to spend some time and look at how we got to where we are. Right? There's a lot of history and of thought, and often you'll be looking at languages that you might never have heard of. They never hit the mainstream. They never even hit the side stream, right? But they're kind of, some of them are touch points on the way and have a lot of great ideas there. And so that also is just to kind of get your kind of mental faculties thinking about this in the right ways, going back kind of and seeing how things kind of came to where they are today.
And that's an interesting way to think about it, because sometimes we feel like, hey, let's just jump off and do this thing, but
it's like, no, that's not unsounded. That was proved.
Yeah.
At this time,
Or we can just be like Prolog and say no.
That's deep.
Wow.
Prolog jokes, everybody. Can we get IntelliSense in C# preprocessor blocks? I suppose my question is, the infrastructure available to do so already, and could I make a VS plugin?
Answer is maybe. We do some of that today, at least in cases where we have preprocessor and you're in a shared file that's linked into several projects. It's tricky to get right. So because you have to do things that it becomes an intractable problem almost if things get really complicated with the preprocessor, because you kind of have to sit there and say, well, I need to merge two different possible futures. I don't know how you're compiling this right now, and it could be over here and it could be over there, and maybe this one's turned on, and what are all the combinations of preprocessor symbols? So it can be really, really tricky. It's there. You could make it work. It's kind of low on the priority list, though.
Yeah.
It's not something we go after really.
Well, this was really nice. We're out of time. It's always fun to have you. Again, I always love talking to these guys.
Yeah.
I'll come to your offices. We'll make more videos as more stuff comes out. Thanks for watching. This has been the Future of .NET Languages. We'll see you around the flip side. Take care.